You're listening to Epic Footnote Productions. Go to Linktree/Epic Footnote for links to all of our streaming platforms, YouTube channel, social media pages, and merch site. That's linktr.ee/Epic Footnote.
Hey everyone, what's going on? It's 2 minutes to review. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
Longest album review in under 2 minutes wins. You clicked on the picture. This one, I would say it's a highly anticipated album of 2024.
Very much so.
If you haven't heard, Mr. Kerry King had put together a new project, and it just so happens they're putting out their debut album. It's called From Hell I Rise.
Literally, the second he got off stage of Slayer's quote-unquote final show ever at the Kia Forum in LA. I say quote-unquote, and I'm sure we're going to get into this in a little bit too. Basically, he started hinting as soon as Slayer was done on stage, yep, I'm going to start. I'm not done musically and creatively. I'm going to start, recording a solo material, release some solo records and start touring myself. I'm not thrilled that Slayer's done, so I'm going to do my own solo stuff. And then various things happened. Some stuff that we're still not entirely sure as to why it took this long, but if this sounds familiar, it's because every artist probably went through this. Literally COVID and the whole global pandemic literally put a pause on what he was trying to do and just delayed everything. And then just lots of rumors going around over the years as to who's actually even involved in his solo project. At one point, Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown even were attached. Maybe, I don't know about Rex Brown actually, but definitely Phil Anselmo and Gary Holt, who of course is from Exodus, but also is in Slayer for the last few years and will be returning in Slayer when they come back this year. They were attached to this project in various forms, or at least rumored to be. And even Kerry King admitted, kind of had talked about Anselmo, but I still wasn't feeling it. And then, it's funny because as those rumors are circulating, I remember going all right, I get it. That will sell some records. But man, I really wish that instead Kerry would actually record an album with Mark from Death Angel and Phil Demmel, who used to be in Machine Head and Violence. Because Phil Demmel is an amazing guitarist, and he's even filled in on Slayer for a tour when Gary Holt had to step out for a family matter. And Mark is just one of the most underrated singers in metal, period. And his voice actually could really do a good job if Kerry decides to do, some solo concerts that, of course, he's going to have to play the occasional Slayer song at. Well, apparently Kerry King was in my head in dreams, because then finally, in the year of 2024, he finally announces that he's going to release a solo album. And who does he get to play on his solo album and to be part of his solo tour? Mark from Death Angel and Phil, formerly of Machine Head and Violence. It's just that. And actually, to me, that's even more exciting than the fact that Kerry King of Slayer is finally releasing a solo album. That it's Kerry King recording with Mark and Phil. And he also got Kyle Sanders on bass from Hell Yeah fame. And then, of course, Paul Bostaff, his go-to drummer for many years, who's also been in Slayer on and off throughout the years. So it's half of Slayer with another pretty killer lineup of metal all-stars. So, of course, after all these years of anticipation, we've talked at great length, Matt, about how Slayer has one of the most devoted, hardcore fan bases, which you can listen to in a past episode of Am I Missing Something on any streaming platform you can imagine. So, of course, just the idea of Kerry King branching out from Slayer was going to catch our attention. But now that he announced his lineup too, it's we had to give this a listen. So, before you get a chance to listen to it yourselves, we're going to share with you what we think of Kerry King's debut solo effort, From Hell I Rise. With that, Matt, would you mind if I go first? The last few times I was a gentleman. I let you go first. I'd like to share my thoughts on this too first, if you don't mind.
That doesn't surprise me. You want to take over the reins again?
Yeah. Rain and blood. But you...
All right, Mr. Zach. Whenever you're ready.
Count me down.
3, 2, 1, go.
All right. This is going to sound like a huge cop-out when I ask you this. But are you a fan of Slayer? Yeah? Well, then you're going to enjoy this album. Because the truth is, and even he's admitted that there's definitely songs that was originally written for Repentless, the last Slayer album. It really does sound like a Slayer album. In fact, if you had told me that this actually was a new Slayer album, I'd be like, oh, this sounds pretty good. And that's not really a diss either, to be honest, because something that I always loved about Slayer is that they almost capture this sense of what hell would sound like, and the production on this definitely captures that sense. There's of course a few little moments here and there that make you go, oh, okay, that's a little different. Like the song Crucifixion, there's a bridge or breakdown that actually has a very Sabbath like doomy vibe to it that I'm like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And then even the song Two Fists, that's much more of a punk rock, maybe even dare I say suicidal tendencies kind of flair to it that I wasn't expecting either, especially considering the rest of the album. I mean, the only real complaint is that I love Mark as a singer, and I think he sounds great on this album, but I wish he was allowed to show off more of his vocal range as opposed to just being told, hey, sound like Tom Araya. That's your goal. That's what we need you to do on this record. With that said, though, I mean, it's, again, not a huge complaint because it's a fun Slayer-esque album. And really, if anything else, all else fails, the thing that this album really proves is that Phil Demmel is an incredible guitar player. That's the one thing that really makes me go, oh, wow, that's cool. That's really hit. I mean, of course, Kerry King has a lot of great moments himself, obviously, because it's his solo album. But the guitar solos that Phil does layer in really does add a melodic little just intricacy that makes you really want to like pay attention more and just start kind of humming along to even. And it just kind of goes to show you that, you know what, man, if any band out there needs a guitar player, they need to call Phil ASAP first. So, yeah, I'll ask you again. Do you like Slayer? You're going to like this album then.
All right, time's locked in. And star rating out of 5.
I'm going to give this 3.5 satanic stars.
So pentagrams, if you will.
Pentagrams. I was like, what is the... I'm a terrible Satanist, in case you couldn't tell. Yeah, 3.5 pentagrams. Listen, I'm not going to tell you that this is the metal album of the year. We already know what album that is, actually. If you listen to the past episode of ours, you'll know. I'll let Matt share some thoughts first before I go deeper in, but it's a fine Slayer album that's not actually by Slayer. So without further ado, Matt, you ready?
Let's do it.
3, 2, 1. Satan!
Absolutely everything that Zach said is exactly what I was going to say. To be completely honest, if you love Slayer, when you go see Kerry King live, don't yell Slayer. You're yelling Kerry instead. Because this exactly is a Slayer album without it being Slayer. However, I do have to pose a little bit of a different question than what Zach said. Is that necessarily a good thing? I understand that part of the band is from Slayer, and you've got some other metal all-stars that are on here. However, there are certain itches that this album doesn't scratch. Because when you listen to Mark on vocals, you know what? It's maybe not Tom. It might sound close, but he might do a little bit of a different thing here and there, and that might not fit well with you. It might also kind of harken back to some other metal bands that had all-stars in it and just didn't quite scratch the same itch, kind of like Damage Plan, at least for me. The band that had Dimebag and Vinnie Paul from Pantera that didn't feature Phil Anselmo on vocals, and it felt musically like almost the same thing. However, it just didn't feel right. And there's certain instances on this album where I felt like, if this sounds like Slayer, but the vocals just aren't hitting me right for some reason. But then Kerry kind of brings it back on a song like Toxic with a clear throwback to Rain and Blood. And it brings you back to like, okay, maybe I can overlook that. And because we may or may not get another Slayer album, this will do in the meantime.
Time is locked in. So out of 5 pentagrams, or doom stars, if you want to get a little bit more on the proggier side of Satanism, what would you give From Hell I Rise?
I'd give it 3.5 as well.
So you weren't as like, wow. I mean, you didn't think Mark sounded as much like Tom as you would have maybe liked.
I mean, there are instances where you kind of forget that you're not listening to Tom, but then you listen to that, and then he does something that's not Tom-like, and then it's, well, wait a second. Oh, that's right. This isn't Tom. Huh. Okay. I just think that it's so close to Slayer that you're expecting Slayer.
Would you have preferred? Because I was torn as to whether or not I really was bothered by how much this sounded like a Slayer album. Would you have preferred that maybe Kerry went in a different musical direction, like instead of like literally just trying to do a Slayer album without the members who didn't want to keep touring, instead maybe like channeling his Judas Priest or Merciful Fate roots and doing a more classic metal sounding album, or even just something different?
I almost think that you probably need to, or if you want to do something like this, don't get a band that sounds just like Slayer. Get somebody different. I understand that maybe you completely disagree with the band breaking up and saying farewell, and that sits bad with you, and you just want to go out and keep doing what you're used to doing. So you find a group of guys that you say, quote unquote, these are the guys who I want to play with for the rest of my career. And yeah, okay, fine. That's fine. But you're always going to get compared to Slayer, right? You're never going to have the chance to show that you could do anything other than Slayer. And I thought maybe this might be a different kind of creative outlet for him, but it really just, and like I said on Toxic is a clear throwback to Rain and Blood. And, can you do a little bit more? Can you show me a little bit more? Can you flavor it a little bit differently? I mean, there's like different hardcore elements throughout the album. There's some prog elements that are in there, but they don't explore it deep enough to really tear it away from Slayer.
It's interesting because I also feel like we've talked about this, I think, a little bit also in previous episodes, how it's the timing of everything going on right now is so weird. In that, a little history lesson too, with the recap of what we done in a past episode. I think it couldn't have been more than 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks after Kerry King announced he's finally releasing a solo album. He, here's who's playing on the album, who's touring with me, and also basically throwing his former members on the bus. Like, yeah, I haven't talked to Tom in 5 years since we last played together. Slayer's never getting back together. Literally 2 weeks later, they announced reunion shows. And right now, like this summer, he's basically like performing a handful, like a few show, no, more than a few shows, like a tour of Lamb of God and Mastodon opening for them, and festivals with his solo band, and then doing 3 random headlining festivals with Slayer at the same time. And even Phil Demmel was like, I'm not gonna lie, when I saw the news about that, I was confused because that was the first time I heard about it. So it's just like the timing of it. Like if Slayer wasn't reuniting this year, I'd be like, okay, this really is just like Kerry trying to show that he wanted Slayer to keep going, that this is what he would do if Slayer was still continuing on, or even just to prove that, like, hey, I actually did have a much bigger role in Slayer than some fans and critics were criticizing me of over the past years. It wasn't just Jeff and Tom running the show. So the fact that like we're getting essentially a Slayer album that's not called Slayer the same year that Slayer is playing reunion shows is definitely odd.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right. But then again, everybody who loves Slayer is going to love this album. So is it really a bad thing?
And that's the thing too. It's not even that it's like, it doesn't feel overly desperate either. Like it actually, like it's an enjoyable Slayer album.
Oh, they're not phoning it in by any stretch of the imagination.
Which makes me actually more annoyed that
committed.
Which makes me more annoyed that the reunion tour is even happening. It's like, you actually had something good here with this album. Now it's kind of dampered by this tour.
I mean, what are the chances that maybe his solo band opens up for Slayer?
I mean, that could be cool.
So you get an extra 45 minutes of Slayer.
not a terrible. I mean, listen, I just, the very, very least, I do love that Mark and Phil are getting a little bit more exposure to their capabilities because of this project, because it's opening them up to, probably a lot more fans than really realized. Oh yeah, like I don't know how familiar you are, Matt, with Death Angel, but I really do think that Death Angel are one of the very underappreciated metal thrash bands out there. Like they were just one or two bad luck instances away from actually maybe even breaking it into the big four. And Phil, I think, got the raw end of the deal of Machine Head. So I think, at the very least, cool that they're getting a little bit of spotlight. So if they were to, if I would almost be like, hey, if Slayer, as annoying as it would be if Slayer did another tour, despite saying, no, we're never going to get back together. No, we're just going to do festival shows together. If they did the tour and they brought Kerry King solo band as the opener, it's like, well, at least they got a good gig out of it, at least for that. It is interesting, though, Matt. I want to get your thoughts on this because in that Rolling Stone interview with Kerry King, where he announced this, and he was like asked about were the rumors true about Anselmo being a part of this project? It's like, no, there was the label definitely would have liked me to pursue that, and there was definitely a little bit of talk of it. It never went past talks and ideas, and I like Phil. He's my friend, but I just knew he wasn't right for this project. I knew Mark was right for this project. But then apparently when the interviewer asked, were you ever considered? And he also mentioned also, if Phil joined the band, then we would have been automatically pushed to arenas and we would have had to prepare much differently for that. And I'm like, interesting that you would think that. But then the interviewer asked, were you ever in consideration for the Pantera gig? And Kerry King said no comment, which makes me wonder if that's another reason why this was delayed. And that was Kerry, because apparently also, while Charlie Benante was always a sure thing to replace Vinnie Paul in Pantera, Zakk Wylde was never the sure thing, even though to everyone that seemed like a no-brainer. So I wonder what your thoughts, would you have almost rather, instead of a solo project, or even would you have rather, even instead of Pantera reforming the way they are currently with Zakk Wylde, Charlie from Anthrax, and Rex and Phil, I almost would have loved if Phil and Rex joined Paul and Kerry and formed a Pantera / Slayer tribute supergroup and just toured the country doing covers of both bands and a few originals. Would you have preferred that over what we currently have? Or are you kind of fine with what we got?
No, I'm good with what we got. I really think that the right guitarist got the job in Pantera.
You think Zakk Wylde's the only guy?
Yeah, I've said it since college. I've said it since 2004 that if they were ever going to redo Pantera, Zakk Wylde's the only choice.
And actually, now that you mentioned about 2004, I remember one of the things that kind of got revealed, I think it was by Kerry King, that Zakk Wylde, and Dimebag were actually in the works of trying to do a similar, I think Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, and they did a few rotating guitarists, but the G3 kind of tour.
Yeah.
Where so basically Zakk, Dimebag, and Kerry were in talks of trying to do that kind of tour together. I think it was a mixture of them doing solo stuff, but then also having their three bands actually tour together too. And that never happened because of various reasons. Various reasons. I mean, because of Dimebag's death. That's a great what if, what could have happened if those three got to actually do a solo album together. Also, love that you mentioned Damage Plan.
Yeah, that was the first band that I thought of when I heard this. It's harkening back to the vocalist thing, right? When you hear Damage Plan, it's oh yeah, there's Vinny and there's Dime and they're sounding real good. And then whoever the vocalist was, I don't even remember his name.
Pat, I forget his last name, but he was actually the rhythm guitarist in Rob Halford's solo band. And I guess Dimebag always loved the Halford solo stuff. And Pat was like, "Oh, I want to sing in your band." He's like, "I didn't know you could sing." And sure enough, he could.
Yeah,
and that's how I got the gig.
It sounded Pantera-esque, until you heard the vocals. Then it's like, oh, well.
You see, though, I feel like with this album, From Hell I Rise, to go back to what we're reviewing here, I actually was more surprised by how much Mark channeled and sounded like Tom. Whereas Pat was like, I can definitely, like, there's no similarities between him and Selma. Whereas, like, honestly, if you told me that it was actually Tom on this record, I'm like, wow, that was the most invigorated I've ever heard Tom sound in many, many years. Which was kind of a downer because Mark is such an incredible vocalist with such a range. And I would have liked actually a different vocalist, a few different variations on songs.
Like I said in the review, once you start getting to the point of it sounds so much like Slayer that when they do something different from Slayer, it's like, oh, well, why didn't you just stay with Slayer? Why are we doing this different thing? Instead of it being, oh, well, let me take a chance and try to sound different. And then, oh, well, maybe it doesn't hit all the time, but you know what? I can maybe overlook it, depending on your take on the album. Yeah, but for me, it sounded okay. It just didn't. There, like the times that it's off, it's like, huh. Well, it's not Slayer. It's not meant to be Slayer. But then why do you sound so much like Slayer? So there's a lot of questions. But like I said, for the average beer drinking folk who's going to go to concerts and going to hear this live, you're not going to care so much because it's 95% Slayer.
And maybe you'll even enjoy it. But you know what, though? None of that really matters. Right, Matt?
Correct.
What really matters is who gave the longest review in under 2 minutes. So, Matt, what was my time? Where did I rank in?
Well, your review time, it definitely did rise to 2 minutes and 28 seconds.
Oh, that was a long one, huh?
Yes.
Well, Matt, we both lost because you came in, admittedly, shorter than I did, but still just over 2 minutes at 2 minutes and 3 seconds. So there you go. None of us won. Or we all won because we got, in theory, a new Slayer album without it actually being called Slayer. So maybe we all did win. But what did you think? Did you actually enjoy From Hell I Rise? Did it make you wish that Slayer would do more than just a few festivals this summer? Or are you content? Are you actually more annoyed that Slayer's back and that you'd rather have Kerry focus on the solo band instead? Let us know on Facebook, Instagram, X/Twitter, Threads, TikTok, at Epic Footnote. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel where we talk a lot about Slayer, Metallica, a bunch of our favorite metal bands. And thank you to Lucky 13 Beard Co.
Log on to lucky13beardco.com. All of the finest beard balms and oils that the internet has to offer. We even have our very own with them. It is called the Lemmy, and it smells fantastic. It smells like bourbon, tobacco, cola, and leather. If that's maybe not your thing, well, they've got a ton of other really awesome scents that I'm sure going to love. And we're going to help you get in with the guys. If you've ever wanted to try some and you've been kind of on the fence, 10% off is what we're going to give you off of your entire order. So throw anything in the cart. Use the code EFP10 at checkout. You will get 10%, like I said, off of everything. Lucky13, the number beardco.com, and use the code EFP10 at checkout.
And I can guarantee you, Kerry King, sir, if you're listening to this, that you, with your glorious, long, big beard, you will love this beard oil that we produce at Lucky 13 Beard Co. Your beard would just smell amazing with the Lemmy scent. Hit us up so we can hook you up with a bottle. Please, Kerry. Please. Also, you know how else you can help us so we keep producing episodes like this? Go to our Linktree page where you can find a merch site with hats, t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs with our cool logo on it. It's a cool way to support us so we can keep doing this, but also to let your friends know, hey, I listen to Matt and Zach talk about Slayer. Because, you know, you need to watch that Slayer t-shirt once in a while too. Put on our t-shirt. Give your Slayer t-shirt a break. Just for one day, not the whole week. We get it. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you join us for another episode real soon. Matt, join me and scream Slayer.
No, Kerry.
Oh yeah, that would actually be fun to do at shows. Kerry, like that just would be fun. Let's make that a thing, everyone. Bye.
See ya.